This presentation is about a species trial established using Loblolly pine, bareroot, and container longleaf at the Northern Historical Range of Longleaf pine in Mississippi, the winter of 2022 and 2023. So historically, longleaf pine was more dominant on the landscape than loblolly pine in much of southern Mississippi. However, due to the active fire suppression in earnest around 100 years ago, now 120 years ago, and after the initial cutover of these stands as Americans moved west, the faster growing loblolly pine and slash pine were often planted, and now we have residential areas, and so we have a lot more urban expansion, the woodland urban interface expanding into the forested areas. So much of the longleaf pine, which was once dominant, has been lost, and you can see a drastic decrease. However, due to poor pulpwood markets and an inability of for landowners to find loggers willing to harvest pulpwood aged and sized trees, increasing reforestation costs such as due to inflation, pine plantations are now commonly going to be more established using lower planting densities. And so at these lower planting densities, an initial pulpwood thinning is not necessary or even warranted. Thus, there's the potential that longleaf pine may be more commonly planted. So therefore, we may see a switch to some extent from loblolly pine, because it was often faster growing than longleaf, and more to longleaf particularly at these lower densities, with the pulpwood dominated earlier thinning is no longer really advantageous. And there's incentive programs for the longleaf restoration programs related to this substantial loss in the acreage of that forest type. So this study also looked at the benefits of lower planting density. It was going to be a demonstration site in some ways. So for instance, what are the benefits of planting a lower planting density, 454 seedlings versus 605 seedlings? Well, as I mentioned, you have lower seedling costs and lower planting costs, and as the reforestation costs have increased, we need to find ways to reduce our reforestation cost, to provide better financial returns. There's fewer passes on a property, which can lower the cost of site preparation and first year herbaceous weed costs, any cost that's related to the number of passes. And then you have an extended time to crown closure and the need for a thinning to open back up the crown. That allows then to keep trees vigorous and to maintain good growth rates, plus allows an ample amount of light, moisture, and nutrients, but particularly light for the understory vegetation, which is often beneficial for wildlife habitat. You have an earlier production of more valuable chip and saw and saw log trees, as I mentioned, getting away from the pulpwood. You can get away from two thinning regimes, just a single thinning or a clear cut, and the fact that we can't get loggers to come out and thin forest. Therefore, you have fewer contracts, fewer traffic on your property. You're reducing at least harvest, maybe one, if not even two, if you just have a final clear cut. Potentially greater access for harvesting equipment. Therefore, there's no need for a first row thinning. And here I wanted to show you that when these lower planting densities, these wider spacings, you have more light for an extended period of time. So therefore, you have understory vegetation for a longer period of time relative to tighter spacings and higher planting densities. And then we can see here that with these wider, lower planting densities, particularly when you pair them with rectangular plantings, that you have greater access for this logging equipment. Therefore, you can get away from the need for an absolute need, I should say, for a row first thinning. Why is that bad? Because when you have a row first thinning, you're taking out bad trees, which is a good thing, because you want to have your best trees going forward. Right, so you're going to do a first row thinning on a pulpwood, which is lower value material. You want to have the best trees growing forward into your chip and saw and your saw log, your higher value products. So when you do a row thinning, you take out bad trees, which is good, but you're also taking out good trees because there's no selection of quality. You're just taking out that row. When I can do a logger select or a forester marked first thinning, I can come in here and I can take out the negative trees and just leave the good trees growing into my chip and saw and my saw log product classes. And I can extend the time to issues with southern pine beetle, and as we've seen this year, Ips beetles with the drought, because I should have a longer time of keeping my trees vigorously growing. Benefits of the rectangularity, as I said, is basically the same. So I'm gonna plant more rectangular and less square. Wider spacings can be good for fuel breaks. So this is gonna kind of act like a fuel break to keep the fire along the ground. and I can have an easier job of plowing the field breaks. And it could even result in more dispersion of the pine bark beetle, the pheromones that are attractants like phentalin and nipstanol. Right here, they may stay around a little bit more. Perhaps the wind can take them out if you're in with the direction of the wind. So there's a lot of advantages to lower planting densities and rectangularity. So then this study then was about longleaf and loblolly, comparing them, as well as trying to give an example of the lower planting densities. And it occurred on the MAFES Truck Crops Branch Experiment Station about 30 miles south of Jackson near Crystal Springs. And that's basically the northern historical range of longleaf. And so that's why this study was comparing longleaf with loblolly. But longleaf definitely was historically found or native to Copiah County and that area. And it has a Providence silt loam, which is an alfalfa. And prior to this study, it was grown for pasture grass, cut for hay for around 20 years. So there's issues with soil compaction. So on October 19th and 21st of 2022, a chemical site prep was conducted with a cord, glyphosate, and then Southern Ag MSO. And unfortunately, for I don't know why, but I could never get Emancipare, chopper, site prep. So we got good vegetation control at the time in October, but we didn't get good residual control going forward. And so compared with the drought and that lack of good residual control of the herbaceous vegetation, we had problems with survival, and I'll come back to that here in a second. But because of the cutting for hay, you had a substantial soil compaction, so we ripped it, and you put the single shank into the ground. It goes in about 15 inches. It breaks up any hard pan or fragipan, kind of hard surface layer, and that helps to the seedlings with transplant shock and to get their root mass going. 454 seedlings per acre were planted in March of 2023. Bare root, loblolly pine, and container longleaf. 16 feet between rows and 6 feet within a row, so a rectangular spacing. And the proper planting depths were used: deep for loblolly, like 5 to 4, and then shallow for longleaf, where you want to see some amount of the plug, some amount of the container peat, vermiculite mix. You don't want that bud buried. If you're going to bury the bud, you're going to kill the seedling. So you definitely don't want this, and this is way too shallow. But you definitely want to be planting loblolly about here, not exactly right at the collar coming out of the nursery. And then in late April, a first year over-the-top herbaceous weed control was conducted using Arsenal Emancipare. So I wanted to get that into the site prep tank, and actually late April was probably too late as well. It would have been better to get it like in the 1st of April. So here is May 20th. Here's a longleaf. Here's June 14th. Very good control in May, resulting from that first year herbaceous weed control. This is actually amazing. This is 2 to 2.5 months after planted, and longleaf is already out of its infamous grass stage and already going into the candle growth. And that is amazing. Now, unfortunately, then we had a historic drought. From July 17th to October 4th in Raymond and truck crops, you basically had no rain. And beyond that, you had excessive temperatures, high temperatures, 90 degrees or more for a total of 65 days in that period with an average of 95 degrees. So that by September, October, and December, but particularly in September and October, you had severe droughts. And so unfortunately, the longleaf did not do well. You had around 1 to 2% survival in late January 2024, and then about 8.3% on average of loblolly in January. And of those surviving, though, the average height was 13.4 inches. So that is really too bad. Here's an example of about a 21-inch tall seedling, the maximum. The study was really doing well in June, and then of course the drought started in mid-July. I didn't get good vegetation control like I wanted to with the Emancipare or the chopper. Very disappointed in the results, but as I mentioned, the study was really doing well. We'll just have to replant. Thank you.